I Am Legend looks like a quiet apocalypse with empty streets, one man, one dog, and the slow unraveling of sanity in a world that's already dead. But behind that silence is a production that nearly collapsed under rush deadlines, last-minute creative reversals, and an ending so controversial that audiences rejected it outright. The creatures you remember weren't the original plan, and one moment early in the film still sparks arguments nearly 2 decades later. These are 20 shocking and bizarre facts behind I Am Legend.
No, let's go! We gotta go home, Sam!
Fact number 1. The mannequin really did move, and it wasn't a camera trick. About halfway through the movie, one of the most unsettling moments happens without a jump scare, without music, and without explanation. As Dr. Robert Neville drives through Manhattan, he spots a mannequin he calls Fred, standing in the middle of the street near Grand Central Terminal. And as Neville stares at it, something feels wrong. The head appears to move, just slightly, enough to make audiences question whether they imagined it. That moment wasn't an optical illusion or a trick of editing. The filmmakers deliberately replaced the mannequin with a mime actor for a split second. The goal wasn't to be obvious, it was to introduce doubt. To make viewers experience the same creeping uncertainty Neville feels as isolation begins to fracture his perception of reality. Even today, fans argue about whether the mannequin actually moves, and that debate is exactly what the filmmakers wanted. It's the first clear sign that Neville's greatest enemy might not be the infected outside, but his own deteriorating mind. Fact number 2. Will Smith studied solitary confinement to prepare for the role. To understand what total isolation does to a person, Will Smith didn't rely on imagination. He interviewed former prisoners who had survived long-term solitary confinement, along with a former prisoner of war who had endured extended psychological isolation. What they told him was surprisingly consistent. Survival depended on routine, structure, creating rules for yourself when no one else exists to enforce them. That insight became the backbone of Neville's character. His daily schedules, his rituals, his obsessive sense of order in a world that no longer has any. Smith also visited the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to learn about virology and real-world outbreak response. He later said the experience fundamentally changed how he viewed humanity's vulnerability. That research didn't just inform the performance, it grounded the film's apocalypse in something uncomfortably plausible. Fact number 3. The film's silence was inspired by watching a movie with no sound. The quiet in I Am Legend isn't accidental. It was inspired by an unexpected moment during pre-production. Director Francis Lawrence was watching the pianist late at night with the sound muted so he wouldn't wake his baby. Without dialogue or music, the emotional weight of the images hit him even harder than expected. That experience reshaped the film's approach. Lawrence leaned into silence as a storytelling tool, allowing long stretches with minimal dialogue, ambient sound, or music. The emptiness of the city becomes louder than words, forcing the audience to sit with Neville's loneliness instead of being distracted from it. In a genre often dominated by noise and chaos, I Am Legend uses quiet as a weapon, making every sound, every movement, and every moment of tension feel heavier and more intimate. Fact number 4. The entire film had just 16 weeks of pre-production. Big-budget films typically spend months, sometimes over a year, in pre-production. I Am Legend didn't have that luxury. When delays struck Hancock, Warner Bros. Abruptly reshuffled its release schedule and forced I Am Legend into production with just 16 weeks to prepare. That meant unfinished scripts, incomplete designs, and major creative decisions being made on the fly. Entire sequences were planned, while construction crews were already building sets. Visual effects concepts were approved before anyone knew if they could be executed properly. This compressed timeline created a domino effect that would haunt the production, especially when it came time to design the creatures and finalize the ending. The film may feel deliberate on screen, but behind the scenes, it was racing against the clock. Fact number 5. The Darkseekers were switched to CGI 1 week into filming. Originally, the Darkseekers weren't digital creatures at all. They were played by dancers, gymnasts, and parkour athletes wearing heavy prosthetic makeup. The idea was to give them a physical, unsettling movement style that felt human but wrong. After just 1 week of filming, director Francis Lawrence reviewed the footage and hated it. He later described the creatures as looking like mime artists running across Washington Square Park. With production already underway, he made a drastic call: abandon the practical performers and switch to full CGI. There wasn't enough time to perfect the digital effects, and Lawrence has since admitted this decision was his single biggest regret on the film. The rushed CGI Darkseekers became one of the most criticized elements of I Am Legend, a reminder of how quickly creative compromises can reshape a movie forever. Fact number 6. Nearly 1/3 of the budget was spent just to empty Manhattan. Creating an abandoned New York City wasn't just expensive, it was borderline impossible. Out of the film's $150 million budget, roughly $40 million was spent on making Manhattan look deserted, and very little of that was achieved with simple visual tricks. Entire city blocks were shut down during tightly controlled early morning and weekend windows. Buildings were laser mapped. Thousands of reference photos were taken to digitally remove people, cars, reflections, and modern clutter. Production assistants dressed streets with overgrown weeds, abandoned vehicles, and decaying storefronts, only to have everything reset hours later when the city woke up. New York is never empty. That was exactly why the filmmakers insisted on shooting there. The emptiness had to feel unnatural, like the city itself was missing something vital, and achieving that illusion became one of the most complex and expensive visual undertakings of the entire film. Fact number 7. The Brooklyn Bridge sequence became New York City's most expensive scene ever. The evacuation flashback on the Brooklyn Bridge lasts only minutes on screen, but it took 6 nights to film and cost an estimated $5 million, making it the most expensive scene ever shot in New York City at the time. The production required coordination between more than 14 government agencies, including the NYPD, Coast Guard, National Guard, and multiple city departments. Over 1,000 extras were used, along with military Humvees, striker vehicles, helicopters, and Coast Guard boats on the East River below. Every shot had to be carefully staged within narrow time windows to avoid disrupting the city. One wrong move could shut the entire sequence down. The result is a moment that feels chaotic and massive, but behind the scenes, it was controlled with almost military precision. Fact number 8. 3 different dogs played Sam. Sam, the emotional heart of I Am Legend, was portrayed by 3 German shepherds. Abby handled most of the performance-heavy scenes, Kona served as her backup, and a puppy named Sammy appeared in flashbacks. Abby was discovered at a California kennel just weeks before filming began. She didn't even know her own name yet. Despite intensive training, she famously had no interest in playing fetch, an ironic detail considering how often Sam retrieves prey in the film. Will Smith later admitted that Abby's performance made certain scenes far more difficult to film emotionally. The bond between Neville and Sam wasn't just acting, it developed naturally over the course of production, making what comes later hit even harder. Fact number 9. Sam's most disturbing scenes were carefully engineered for safety. Sam's injury and infection scenes look brutal, but they were executed with extreme care. To create the limp, trainers placed tape on Abby's paw, altering her gait without causing pain. When Sam attacks Neville after becoming infected, Abby was actually lunging at a chew toy strapped to Will Smith's shoulder. The glowing red eyes were added digitally in post-production, and during sequences involving gunfire or explosions, Abby was replaced with a fully CGI dog to eliminate any risk. The result is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in modern sci-fi, crafted through a combination of practical tricks, visual effects, and trust between actor and animal. Fact number 10. The original ending was rejected twice by test audiences. The most controversial element of I Am Legend was never meant to be controversial at all. The original ending revealed that the Darkseekers were intelligent, emotional beings, and that Neville had become their monster by kidnapping one of their own. In that version, Neville returns the captive female, realizes his role in their suffering, and survives. The message was clear: humanity didn't win. It misunderstood. Test audiences hated it. According to director Francis Lawrence, it wasn't just disliked, it was wildly rejected in 2 separate screenings. Viewers wanted Neville to remain a hero, not a morally ambiguous figure forced to confront his own cruelty. That reaction triggered a last-minute scramble that would permanently change the film's legacy. Fact number 11. The theatrical ending was shot just weeks before release. After test audiences overwhelmingly rejected the original ending, Warner Bros. Ordered an emergency rewrite. The solution was drastic and fast. A completely new ending was written, approved, filmed, and edited in a matter of weeks. The reshoot took place over just 3 days, roughly 3 weeks before the movie's theatrical release. Instead of Neville realizing the Darkseekers were sentient, the new ending reframed him as a traditional hero who sacrifices himself to save humanity. The change dramatically altered the film's meaning. What had been a story about misunderstanding and moral ambiguity became a familiar tale of redemption and self-sacrifice. Ironically, the version audiences originally rejected would later be praised as more faithful to the novel, and would eventually be reinstated as canon. Fact number 12. Neville only watches Shrek. And it's not a joke. One of the most unexpected recurring details in I Am Legend is Neville's obsession with Shrek. It's the only movie he repeatedly rents, quotes, and watches, sometimes talking along with the characters as if they're real people. This wasn't a random comedic choice. The filmmakers selected Shrek because it represents loud, chaotic, communal entertainment, the exact opposite of Neville's silent, isolated existence. Watching the same movie over and over becomes a substitute for human interaction. There's also a darker layer. Neville doesn't just watch Shrek, he memorizes it. He knows every line. It's a sign that time has stopped for him psychologically as well. Without new experiences, repetition becomes routine, and routine becomes survival. What initially feels like a lighthearted gag slowly turns tragic. Shrek isn't comic relief, it's proof of how desperately Neville is clinging to the last fragments of normal human connection. Fact number 13. Arnold Schwarzenegger's version was canceled for going over budget. Long before Will Smith was attached, I Am Legend nearly starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, with Ridley Scott set to direct. This version aimed to radically reinvent Schwarzenegger's on-screen persona. Scott envisioned a nearly silent first hour, minimal dialogue, and practical creature makeup inspired by 17th century wax figures. The tone was somber, introspective, and bleak, a far cry from the action-heavy project's audiences expected from Schwarzenegger at the time. When the budget climbed to roughly $108 million, about $10 million over studio limits, Warner Bros. Pulled the plug. The cancellation freed Ridley Scott to make Gladiator, which would go on to win Best Picture and revive his career. Fact number 14. A Times Square billboard accidentally predicted the future. While Neville navigates an abandoned Times Square, a massive billboard advertises a fictional Batman/Superman crossover. At the time, it was a reference to a canceled early 2000s project that never made it to production. Nearly a decade later, that fictional crossover became reality with Batman vs. Superman in 2016. What was meant as a throwaway piece of set dressing became an oddly prophetic Easter egg, noticed only in hindsight. It's a small detail, but one that reinforces how I Am Legend is filled with unintended echoes of the future hiding in plain sight. Fact number 15. The film accurately predicted Shaq's retirement. Almost. Early in the film, a scrolling news ticker casually mentions that Shaquille O'Neal would retire after the 2009 to 2010 NBA season. At the time, it seemed like meaningless background text. In reality, Shaq retired 1 year later after the 2010 to 2011 season. The prediction missed by just 12 months, close enough to feel eerie rather than coincidental. It's a reminder that I Am Legend wasn't just imagining the collapse of society. It was quietly projecting a future that came surprisingly close to reality in ways no one expected. Fact number 16. Emma Thompson appears in the film completely uncredited. The global catastrophe in I Am Legend begins with a smiling scientist confidently explaining a medical breakthrough on television. That scientist is played by Emma Thompson, and most viewers never realize it. Thompson portrays Dr. Alice Crippen, the woman whose genetically modified measles virus wipes out humanity. Despite appearing in the opening moments of the film and effectively triggering the apocalypse, she received no on-screen credit for the role. The cameo was treated almost like a narrative device rather than a performance, reinforcing how casually the end of the world arrives. By the time audiences recognize the voice or face, civilization is already beyond saving. Fact number 17. Will Smith was digitally moved onto a real aircraft wing. When Neville hits golf balls from the wing of a military jet at the Intrepid Museum, it looks dangerously casual. But Will Smith was never actually standing on the wing. For safety reasons, Smith stood on a platform beside the aircraft while performing the scene. Visual effects artists later digitally repositioned him onto the wing in post-production, preserving the illusion without putting him at risk. It's a subtle effect that most viewers never notice, and that invisibility is exactly why it works. Fact number 18. The film's opening weekend shocked the studio. Warner Brothers projected an opening weekend of around $50 million, which would have been considered a success. Instead, I Am Legend debuted to $77.2 million, nearly doubling expectations. At the time, it became the biggest December opening weekend in box office history, a record that stood for years. The film went on to earn $256 million domestically and $585 million worldwide, cementing Will Smith's reputation as one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. The irony is that the film's massive success came despite, not because of, the compromises that reshaped it. Fact number 19. The studio approved New York City filming after a camcorder test. Warner Brothers initially resisted filming in New York City, fearing the logistics and cost would be unmanageable. To convince them otherwise, director Francis Lawrence flew to Manhattan with a simple camcorder. He filmed crowded streets, then worked with effects artists to digitally remove every person and vehicle. The test footage transformed bustling cityscapes into eerie ghost towns and convinced executives that the effect could work on a larger scale. That low-tech experiment ultimately led to some of the most haunting imagery in modern science fiction. Fact number 20. A comedian was arrested at the film's premiere. At the London premiere in Leicester Square, the celebration took an unexpected turn. British comedian Neg Dupree forced his way onto the red carpet shouting, "I am Negand," as part of a stunt for the show Balls of Steel. Security moved quickly. Dupree was arrested on the spot, abruptly ending the spectacle. What was meant to be a polished global launch concluded with chaos, an oddly fitting epilogue for a film about civilization unraveling without warning. I Am Legend endures not just because of its empty streets or its haunting silence, but because of the choices made under pressure, the ideas abandoned, and the ending audiences weren't ready to accept. And now, with the original ending restored as canon, the story may finally be coming full circle. If you enjoy uncovering the stories hiding behind iconic films, subscribe to Iconic TV Rewind and drop a comment with the next movie you want us to explore.